The first time I saw it, I almost missed it entirely. Just a flicker of movement at the edge of my vision as I was bringing in the trash cans one dusky Tuesday evening. I paused, peering into the gloom where our neatly manicured lawn gave way to the tangled undergrowth of oakwood forest. There, a dark shape among the trees, barely distinguishable from the lengthening shadows. I squinted, trying to make out details. Was it a person? An animal? But the harder I looked, the less certain I became. It seemed to shift and waver like heat distortion on asphalt. I blinked, and suddenly it was gone. I stood there for a long moment, garbage can forgotten in my hands. A cool breeze rustled the leaves, sending a shiver through me that had nothing to do with the temperature. I shook my head, chalking it up to an overactive imagination and too many late nights at the office. "Dad, you okay out there?" My daughter Amy's voice snapped me back to reality. I turned to see her silhouetted in the doorway, the warm light from inside spilling out onto the porch. "Fine, sweetheart," I called back, hefting the can and hurrying inside. "Just thought I saw something in the woods." Amy rolled her eyes as I passed her. At 16, she'd perfected the art of teenage exasperation. "Probably just a deer or something. You've been working too hard." I forced a chuckle, ruffling her hair as I went by. "You're probably right. How about some dinner?" But even as I busied myself in the kitchen, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled over me. There was something off about what I'd seen, or thought I'd seen. It nagged at me, like a word on the tip of my tongue. That night I dreamed of dark woods and watchful eyes. The next few days passed uneventfully. I threw myself into work, grateful for the distraction. But each evening, as I drove home along the winding road that skirted the forest's edge, I found myself scanning the trees. Searching for what? I couldn't say exactly, just a gnawing certainty that something was out there. It wasn't until Friday that I saw it again. This time, there was no mistaking it. I was in the backyard, absent-mindedly watering Amy's mother's old flower beds. Sarah had loved those gardens, spending countless hours coaxing life from the stubborn clay soil. After she passed, I'd done my best to keep them up, more out of obligation than any real passion for horticulture. Lost in memories, I almost missed the prickling sensation on the back of my neck, the feeling of being watched. Slowly I raised my head, and there it was, a figure standing just inside the tree line, tall and naturally still. Even from this distance I could tell it wasn't quite right. Its proportions were off somehow, limbs too long, torso too thin, and its face, I squinted, trying to make out features, but there was nothing there. Just a blank expanse where eyes and mouth should be. The hose slipped from my nerveless fingers, water pooling around my feet. I blinked hard, certain I must be hallucinating. But when I opened my eyes, the figure remained. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice cracking. "Who's there?" No response, not even a twitch. Heart pounding, I took a hesitant step forward. The figure didn't move. Another step, still nothing. I don't know what possessed me to keep going. Some misguided bravery or simple curiosity. But I found myself walking towards the woods, eyes locked on the motionless watcher. 20 yards, 15. Close enough now that I should have been able to make out clothing, skin tone, any identifying features. But the figure remained maddeningly indistinct, like trying to focus on a smudge on a camera lens. 5 yards from the tree line, a wave of dizziness washed over me. The world tilted sideways, trees blurring into a green smear. I stumbled, dropping to one knee. When my vision cleared, the figure was gone. I scrambled to my feet, spinning in a circle. Nothing, just trees and lengthening shadows. But the feeling of being observed lingered, raising goosebumps along my arms. "Dad, Dad!" Amy's voice tinged with panic. I turned to see her running across the lawn towards me. "What are you doing?" she demanded as she reached me. "I've been calling you for like 5 minutes!" I blinked at her, disoriented. "What? I was just..." But I trailed off, unsure how to explain. Amy's brow furrowed with concern. "Are you feeling okay? You look really pale." I forced a smile, draping an arm around her shoulders. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just lost track of time out here. Let's head in, okay?" As we walked back to the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed by unseen eyes. That night, I tossed and turned, unable to settle. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that featureless face staring back at me. Around 2 a.m., I gave up on sleep entirely. I crept downstairs, not wanting to wake Amy. A glass of warm milk and some mindless TV. That's what I needed. Anything to quiet the unease churning in my gut. I was halfway through pouring the milk when movement caught my eye. There, beyond the kitchen window, a dark shape hovering at the edge of the yard. My hand jerked, sending milk splashing across the counter. I lunged for the light switch, flooding the backyard with harsh illumination. Nothing, just empty lawn and silent trees. Cursing under my breath, I grabbed a dish towel to mop up the spilled milk. I was losing it, jumping at shadows like a kid, afraid of the dark. I needed to get a grip, but as I turned back to the sink, I froze. There, reflected in the window glass, stood a figure. In the kitchen, right behind me, I whirled around, heart in my throat. The kitchen was empty. I slumped against the counter, breath coming in ragged gasps. This was insanity. I needed to talk to someone, needed help, but who would believe me? The rest of the night passed in a haze of paranoia. I paced the house, checking and rechecking locks, peering out windows at the slightest sound. By the time dawn broke, I was exhausted and on edge. "Whoa, Dad, you look like hell." I glanced up from my untouched coffee to see Amy standing in the kitchen doorway, concern etched across her face. I tried to smile, but it felt more like a grimace. "Rough night," I mumbled. "Couldn't sleep." Amy slid into the chair across from me, studying me intently. "Is this about what happened yesterday?" "In the backyard," I hesitated. How much should I tell her? I didn't want to scare her, but I was starting to fear for both our safety. Before I could decide, Amy spoke again. "Because I've been seeing things too." My head snapped up. "What? What kind of things?" She bit her lip, suddenly looking much younger than her 16 years. "It's probably stupid, just my imagination, but I keep thinking I see someone watching me. At school, on the way home, just standing there staring. I had to ask, what does it look like?" "That's the weird part," Amy said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It doesn't really look like anything, just a shape, but wrong somehow." I reached across the table, clasping her hand tightly. "Listen to me, Amy. I don't know what's going on, but I promise you, we'll figure it out. Together, okay?" She nodded, managing a weak smile. But as I looked into her eyes, I saw my own fear reflected back at me. That afternoon, I drove into town, determined to get some answers. Millbrook wasn't much more than a main street and a handful of neighborhoods, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business. If something strange was going on, someone would be talking about it. I parked in front of Dottie's Diner, the unofficial hub of local gossip. As I pushed through the door, the usual buzz of conversation died away. Every head turned to stare at me. I faltered, suddenly unsure of myself. But then Dottie herself bustled over, a forced cheeriness in her voice. "Well, if it isn't John Taylor, haven't seen you in here for ages." "Coffee?" I nodded, sliding onto a stool at the counter. As Dottie poured, I leaned in close. "Dottie, has anyone been talking about unusual sightings lately?" She couldn't help herself, slopping coffee onto the counter. "Now why would you be asking about something like that?" I glanced around the diner. The other patrons were pointedly not looking our way, but I could tell they were straining to listen. "Because I think I've seen something," I said quietly. "In the woods, and I don't think I'm the only one." Dottie's face paled. She opened her mouth to speak, but was cut off by a gruff voice behind me. "You too, huh?" I turned to see Bill Henderson, Millbrook's sheriff and my old high school buddy, settling onto the stool next to me. His usual easygoing demeanor was nowhere to be seen, replaced by a grim set to his jaw. "Bill," I said, relief flooding through me. "You know something about this?" He sighed heavily, scrubbing a hand over his face. No, but we've been getting calls, people seeing things they can't explain, folks going missing." A murmur ran through the diner at his words. Bill shot a quelling look around the room before continuing in a low voice. "Look, John, I don't know what's going on, but whatever it is, it's not natural, and it's getting worse." I leaned in closer. "What do you mean, worse?" Bill's eyes met mine and I saw real fear there. "The dreams started about a week ago. Now we've got 3 people missing, just gone. No signs of struggle, no evidence left behind. It's like they vanished into thin air." I thought of Amy's confession that morning. The dreams? Yeah, people report seeing a figure in their dreams, standing at the foot of their bed, just watching. And then he trailed off, but I could fill in the blanks. My mind raced, trying to process what I was hearing. This was so much bigger, so much worse than I'd imagined. What are we going to do? I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. Bill shook his head. I don't know. I've got calls in to the state police, even the FBI. But John, I've got a bad feeling about this. Whatever's out there, I don't think it's something we can fight. Not with guns and badges anyway. I nodded slowly, a plan already forming in my mind. I need to get Amy out of here. We'll pack up, head to my sister's place in the city. Might not be a bad idea, Bill agreed. At least until we figure out what we're dealing with. I stood, fishing out my wallet to pay for the untouched coffee. Thanks, Bill, for being straight with me. Be careful, okay? He managed a weak smile. You too, John, and watch the woods. The drive home was a blur, my mind whirling with everything I'd learned. I burst through the front door, calling out for Amy. No answer. Amy? I shouted, panic rising in my throat. Amy, where are you? I tore through the house, checking every room. No sign of her. Her phone lay on her bed, a half-written text visible on the screen. Dad, I see it. It's closer now. I think it's... The message cut off there. I stumbled back, the room spinning around me. This couldn't be happening. Not Amy, not my little girl. A sound from downstairs snapped me back to reality. Footsteps, slow and deliberate. Relief flooded through me. Amy, I called out, hurrying towards the stairs. Amy, is that you? I reached the top of the staircase and froze. There, in the foyer below, stood a figure. Tall, impossibly thin, its proportions all wrong. And its face, God, its face. As I watched in paralyzed horror, it slowly raised a too long arm, pointing directly at me with a finger that ended in a wickedly sharp point. And then it began to climb the stairs,